Okay, good morning to you all. This is going to be my overview of the course of educational measurements and evaluation and what I've learned from it. First and foremost, we started with my class context of students. My students are more fast learners and few of them are moderate and few learners. And my educational goals, I have my first objective is from the general objective is from the topic of introduction to biology, and the other introduction to biology, having the general objective, like by at the end of this topic, the learner should be able to understand that biology is the study of life, and that is under the cognitive domain, and the other under the same general objective, I have the learner should be able to appreciate that all living things experience common life processes, and that is the affective domain. And the other, again, under the same objective, general objective, there is the psychomotor domain. That is, learners should be able to interpret the differences between living organisms and non-living organisms with reasons. Then the second objective is from the topic of cells, and it states that the first thing is, by the end of this topic, the learner should be able to appreciate that a cell is a basic unit of organisms or living things. That is under the affective domain. And again, at the same objective, we have the learner should be able to understand the structures of different specialized cells and how they are related to their functions. That is the cognitive domain. And we have the psychomotor domain. That is, the learner should be able to interpret and develop the skills of using a microscope in finding the magnification. That is under the psychomotor domain. So I also have the other objective, general objective 3, that is classification and diversity of living things. And we have also the cognitive domain. Under the cognitive domain, under that general objective 3, we have the learner should be able to understand the classification as the sorting of living things based on their similarities. The affective learners should be able to appreciate the diversity of living things on living organisms in the environment. And the psychomotor learners should be able to interpret and develop the skills of naming organisms. That is, each organism has a Latin name consisting of the genus. Since my learners were first learners, that is why I decided to teach the topics in senior 1, term 1. And we have the specific learning objectives. Specific learning objective A, it is under the affective domain. Affective domain. In affective domain, it is in the lower levels of affective domain. And it states that the learner will be able to recognize that biology is the study of life, as evidenced by the students working in their pairs to discuss and report their understanding of the term biology, and learners will observe plants and animals, and they identify characteristics that show organisms are living things, research and record the 7 characteristics. The time spent, it was 140 minutes, 78% of week 1, and it is related to general objective 1 and receiving in the first level of affective domain of receiving. And then the second domain is again affective domain. That is the learner, affective domain SLOB. That is, the learner will be able to internalize that life processes are common to all things, but they are manifested differently in different organisms. And this SLO is evidenced by students working in their groups to brainstorm and list the plants and animals needs to enable them to maintain their life processes and discuss which life processes are common to both and plants and record their conclusions in a clear table. Then the time spent on that, it was 40 minutes, 22% of week one, and related to general objective one. And this general objective is under the higher levels of affective domain, that is characterization of value, the last level. I think, and we have again SLOC, which is cognitive domain. It is under general objective 2, and the learners here in this SLOC, the learners will be able to explain and know the best unit of living organisms as is a cell as evidence in the experimentation and demonstration to observe prepared slides of plant and animal cells. Here the time I spent on, it was 75 minutes, 42% of week 2 related to general objective 2, and it is in cognitive lower levels in cognitive domain. And at its level in cognitive domain, it is understanding. So again, the overview of my summative assessment is about the table of specifications. Here, I related my SLOs to the questions I'm going to derive, and I showed each SLO to the question I allocated to it. Here I have the multiple choice questions. As you're going to see in the summative assessment tool I set, I have the short answers, I have the fill-in, and I have the true or false item. So with their domains, and I have only 18 in the lower levels, and I have 12 in the higher levels. Then about my summative, this is a sample of multiple choice questions items. That is a sample, and here is a sample of a true or false question. And the other, this one, number 3, is a sample of a fill-in question. So we go to the short answers. I have a priority of a lot of short answer questions. Here there is, as you see, learners are supposed to put their answers within, and the other, as you see the pictures, so that even the deaf learners can relate what they are being taught, to. Yes, and that, I think one strategy I have is about validity. Here I use construct validity. Those are the scoring rubrics. And the performance assessment tool. Then I have in validity, I use like the content related validity. Here I removed most of my work from the content I set, and again I used the first validity where I took to my student teacher and helped me out with the errors. And I used construct validity to ensure the best tests. For example, I took my paper to an expert, which is Mr. Busifu Joseph, to correct my mistakes. And again, I used the criterion related validity. Here I tried and compared my questions set in those small papers and new papers in order to get the relationship. Then I have the reliability. In order to be consistent while marking, I use the test reliability. But here the student, after my students finishing the paper, I again gave them the same questions in the following week. And second, I used parallel forms of reliability. In this, I set different questions from the same content to the same class. And I again used the inter-rater reliability. I made sure that my assessment tool, for example, I gave Mr. Maset and Caroline, they mark and I see whether they have the same rating with mine. That's all I had for this educational measurements, post projects, say